Welcome back to Real Crimes, the podcast where Hollywood's darkest moments meet real-world tragedy. I'm your host, Claudia, and today we're diving into Episode 3, a case that shook the film industry to its core and raised haunting questions about whether we've learned anything from our past mistakes. October 21st, 2021, the Bonanza Creek Ranch near Santa Fe, New Mexico. The set of a Western film called Rust. Actor and producer Alec Baldwin was rehearsing a scene in a small church building when the unthinkable happened. The prop gun he was holding discharged a live round, killing 42-year-old cinematographer Halyna Hutchins and injuring director Joel Souza. Let me be clear, this wasn't supposed to be possible. Halyna Hutchins was a rising star in cinematography, a mother, an artist with a brilliant future ahead of her, and in an instant, she was gone because of a bullet that should never have been anywhere near that set. But here's what makes this case even more devastating. We've been here before. This exact nightmare played out nearly 3 decades earlier on the set of The Crow in 1993, when Brandon Lee, son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, was killed by a prop gun malfunction. Brandon was just 28 years old, filming what would become his breakout role when a dummy round lodged in a gun barrel combined with a blank charge to create a fatal projectile. After Brandon Lee's death, the industry promised change. New safety protocols were supposedly implemented, conversations happened, regulations were discussed. And yet, 28 years later, Halyna Hutchins died in almost the exact same way. So the question we have to ask is, why didn't we learn? Why weren't those lessons from The Crow enough to prevent the Rust tragedy? To understand what went wrong, we need to look at the cascade of safety failures that led to that fatal moment. And let me tell you, there were a lot of them. First, let's talk about what should happen on a professional film set. Industry standards are crystal clear. Live ammunition, real bullets, should absolutely never be on a movie set, period. When you need gunfire for a scene, you use blanks, which create the flash and sound without a projectile. For close-ups of loaded chambers, you use dummy rounds that look real but have no powder and no primer. A professional armorer, the weapons specialist on set, is responsible for checking every single firearm before it's used, showing it to the assistant director and the actor, and calling out "cold gun" to indicate it's safe. But none of that happened properly on the Rust set. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the 24-year-old armorer, was working only her second film as head armorer. She had expressed concerns about being ready for the job, but was hired anyway. According to the investigation, she brought live ammunition onto the set, mixed in with dummy rounds and blanks. Think about that. Real bullets, the kind that kill people, sitting in boxes next to fake ones that look almost identical. On the morning of the shooting, there were reports that Gutierrez-Reed was not present for a crucial firearms training session. The gun that killed Halyna Hutchins was loaded with a mix of rounds, and nobody checked properly which was which. When assistant director Dave Halls picked up the gun and handed it to Baldwin, he called out "cold gun," signaling it was safe. But he admitted later that he didn't fully check the weapon, he just glanced at it. In March 2024, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months in prison. Dave Halls had already pleaded non-coast to negligent use of a deadly weapon. But the question that dominated headlines was, what about Alec Baldwin? This is where it gets complicated and where we have to talk about the blurred lines of responsibility in modern filmmaking. Alec Baldwin wasn't just the actor who pulled the trigger, he was also a producer on Rust. That dual role is crucial to understanding why this case became so contentious. As an actor, Baldwin maintained that he was told the gun was safe, that he trusted the professionals around him, and that he didn't pull the trigger. The gun simply discharged. But as a producer, did he bear responsibility for the safety culture, or lack thereof, on his set? Let's break down these two roles. An actor's responsibilities regarding firearms are actually pretty straightforward. Never point a gun at someone unless it's specifically called for in the scene and all safety protocols are in place. Always treat every weapon as if it's loaded, attend the safety briefings, follow the armorer's instructions, but fundamentally, actors rely on the weapons experts to ensure the gun is safe. Producers, on the other hand, have a completely different level of responsibility. They're the ones who hire the crew, including the armorer and the assistant directors. They control the budget, which affects how many safety personnel are on set. They set the schedule, which can pressure crew members to rush. They create the overall safety culture of the production. And here's the thing about the Rust production. The safety culture was a disaster. According to the investigation by New Mexico's Occupational Health and Safety Bureau, there were at least a dozen firearm safety violations. The production was fined nearly $137,000, the maximum penalty, for what regulators called a complete failure to follow industry protocols. But it wasn't just about guns. Crew members had been complaining about safety issues for weeks before the tragedy. Camera crew members actually walked off the set the morning of the tragedy, citing safety concerns and long working hours that required them to drive dangerous commutes. This is what makes the producer responsibility question so important. Were corners being cut to save money? Was the production rushing because of budget constraints? Was there pressure to move fast that led people to skip crucial safety steps? Alec Baldwin was charged with involuntary manslaughter in January 2023, but in a dramatic turn during his trial in July 2024, the judge dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled. The reason, the prosecution had withheld evidence from the defense, bullets that might have been relevant to understanding how live ammunition ended up on set. The judge ruled that this was such a serious violation of Baldwin's rights that the case couldn't continue. So legally, Baldwin walked away, but the moral and ethical questions remain. In January 2025, Baldwin filed a lawsuit against the prosecutors, claiming malicious prosecution. The legal battle continues, but the larger questions about responsibility in the film industry are still unanswered. Which brings us back to The Crow and that haunting question, why didn't we learn? After Brandon Lee's death in 1993, there were calls for banning live ammunition on sets, for stricter armorer requirements, for mandatory safety briefings. Some productions implemented these changes, but here's the problem. There's no universal, enforceable standard across the entire film industry. It varies by state, by production company, by budget level. Safety often becomes a cost-benefit analysis, especially on lower-budget productions. Hiring experienced armorers costs money. Having enough time for proper safety checks costs money. Shutting down production when safety concerns arise costs money. And when you're trying to make a film on a tight budget, those costs can feel like luxuries rather than necessities. Since Halyna Hutchins' death, there has been renewed discussion about banning live firearms on sets altogether, replacing them with replicas, and adding muzzle flashes in post-production. Some productions have already made that switch. The 2024 remake of The Crow, directed by Rupert Sanders, used no live fire weapons at all, a deliberate choice in honor of Brandon Lee's legacy. But we're still waiting for industry-wide, legally enforceable standards. We're still having the same conversations we had 30 years ago. So what's the answer? Who's responsible when tragedy strikes on a film set? The armorer, absolutely. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's conviction reflects that. But what about the producers who hire an inexperienced armorer to save money? What about the assistant directors who don't take the time to check weapons properly? What about the production culture that prioritizes speed over safety? And yes, what about the actor who, as a producer, helped create that environment? The truth is, safety on a film set isn't one person's job, it's everyone's job. But when you're the producer, when you're the one with the power to set the budget, hire the crew, and establish the culture, you bear a special responsibility. You have the power to say no, to shut down production if something doesn't feel right, to prioritize safety over schedule. Halyna Hutchins shouldn't have died. Brandon Lee shouldn't have died. These were preventable tragedies, and the fact that they happened decades apart with almost identical causes is a damning indictment of an industry that talks about safety but doesn't always back up those words with action. As we close this episode, I want you to think about this. Halyna Hutchins' son was 9 years old when his mother went to work one day and never came home. He'll grow up without her because multiple people failed to do their jobs properly, because an industry failed to learn from its past, because safety took a back seat to budget and schedule. The question isn't whether another tragedy like this will happen. The question is when, and whether this time we'll finally have the courage to put human lives ahead of profit margins. Until we do, the ghosts of Halyna Hutchins and Brandon Lee will continue to haunt every film set, reminding us that in Hollywood's pursuit of the perfect shot, some shots should never be fired. This has been Real Crimes. I'm Claudia. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.